The debate to me becomes irrelevant. You know, calling it a genocide, not calling it a genocide.
In the middle of the Second World War.
I've lost patience when you start starving kids.
It doesn't matter to me. What matters is those children and saving their lives, because we all saw the same images over the last 19 months. It's not changed. There are still children being burnt alive in their homes and in their tents. People with limbs missing, heads missing, people dying on the streets and dogs eating their bodies. I don't understand the change. I welcome the change, but I don't understand what took them so long. You know, this was a foreign doctor who was in charge. I had my phone and I was filming what was going on in the mass casualty event we had. And they said to me, "You're not allowed to film this. It's against the rules." And I said, "Does this look like the rules? These children that are killed, is this the rules?" People are shouting and screaming. People are angry because you're seeing one patient and their child's on the floor not being seen. Emotions are high, bombs are going off in the background, and then you're seeing children with the most horrific injuries, 60% body burns, 80% body burns, severed limbs, arms. Sometimes when you open blankets, heads are missing, brain matter is everywhere, intestines are hanging out, you're doing procedures on the floor. People have almost given in to the fact that death is just so common in Gaza. Death is not seen as a big deal anymore. They live in between life and death.
Dr. Mustafa, Assalamu alaikum, how are you?
Wa alaikum assalam, alhamdulillah, I'm good.
It's a pleasure to have you. This is our second interview with you.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the OnePath studio. How are you feeling?
Thank you for having me. I really do appreciate you taking the time.
What were your reactions to the first video interview that we did together?
I mean, it seemed to resonate with a lot of people and it went viral. You know, I thought about that. I was really thinking, why is it that my videos were going viral? Why is it my stories were going viral? And you know, I'm a Palestinian from Gaza. Those people, when they came into the mass casualty events and those children, they looked like me. You know, when you pick them up and you put them in a body bag, it's my nose, those are my ears. And there was more emotional attachment for me. And I think people resonated with that, and I think that's what really got through to people. Yeah.
Dr. Mustafa, you've just delivered a speech at Parliament House in Canberra, in Australia, to a sold-out crowd of over 1,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us, how did it feel as a Muslim, as a Palestinian, and a person from Gaza?
There was a lot of pressure. You know, I felt like I was carrying the weight of everyone in Gaza to represent them, to be an ambassador for the people of Gaza, for Palestinians, for Muslims. And you know, there are people more deserving of me and people better than me that could have done it. And I just felt a lot of pressure, but also at the same time I felt a lot of pride that I would have the opportunity to tell my story, my people's story. And I wanted it to be a moment that I could build bridges, you know. I wanted to share the floor. I wanted to build communities together. I wanted to mend broken bridges, because that's what it is to be a Palestinian. It's to be loving and forgiving. And I wanted to show that to people.
Were you at all surprised that the event actually went through?
I was just shocked. I was shocked when I arrived, and the cameras and the news interviews and, you know, all the questions that were people asking, and you know, I was on radio promoting it, and everyone wanted to know what was going on. And I started meeting MPs and meeting government ministers and officials, and then I met Senator Pocock as well. And you know, these are people that you see on TV all the time, and there I was sitting with them and telling them my idea of how I thought Australia could help Gaza.
What was the sentiment in the room?
I think there's an appetite for change. I think people want to see a change, and I think people want to see us helping. You know, the Middle East has seen so much death and destruction. It's had so many countries drop bombs on it, and I think people want something different, and I feel that Australia can be that difference. Mm-hmm. You know, we don't have to sanction children to death, we don't have to bomb them to death, we can heal them, and I think we can do that. We can be that middle power, we can be that healer. You know, you don't have to have a big army, you just have to have a big heart. And I believe, you know, this country is a country built on compassion. People are compassionate here, people care about each other here. That's why I moved here. And I think we can do something special. I think we can lead the world. We can be a world leader. We can lead the world in this.
Dr. Mustafa, we're seeing a noticeable change in attitudes towards Israel, particularly following its recent amplification of assaults in Gaza. Even mainstream commentators, like Piers Morgan, for example, have shifted his tone. He's now acknowledged the crisis as a genocide. What do you think, why do you think that shift is happening? And do you welcome it, or is it too little, too late?
You know, you always welcome positive change, but it's too little, too late for all those dead in Gaza. It was too little, too late when I was there the first time. You know, last year, we were already seeing children violently killed, executed, gunshot wounds to the head and neck. We were seeing that last year. We were seeing children who had been starved to death last year. So I sometimes question and I don't understand, because we all saw the same images over the last 19 months. It's not changed. There are still children being burnt alive in their homes and in their tents. People with limbs missing, heads missing. People dying on the streets and dogs eating their bodies. That's been going on for 19 months. And I don't understand the change. I welcome the change, but I don't understand what took them so long. And, you know, when I was there in Gaza, and you put on a clip of Piers Morgan, and he's debating his moral quandary, you know, whether it's a genocide or not, or whether it's justified, and you're there in the hospital putting headless children into body bags, the debate to me becomes irrelevant. You know, calling it a genocide, not calling it a genocide, calling it ethnic, it doesn't matter to me. What matters is those children and saving their lives. And, you know, I want to take the rhetoric out of it. I just want us to do something for those children.
Thank you. There's recently been a new initiative by the US and Israel to deliver aid in Gaza. But images have shown people lined up in cages, subjected to multiple security checks, just to receive rations that would only last 2 days. Is this aid, or would you say this is something else entirely?
Well, the CEO that was put in charge to do this quit on the grounds of humanitarian grounds. Every major aid organization, the UN even, all oppose this new mechanism of aid. You know, it's humanitarian aid. We need the humanity in the aid. The humanity isn't giving people rations. The humanity isn't lining them up in cages for hours. The humanity isn't shooting them as they're getting those rations. What would be the most humane thing would be to flood Gaza with aid. Food and water and electricity for everybody. Let them eat and drink, save the children. That would be the most humane thing.
You've worked in Gaza 2 times. You've been serving there as a doctor 2 times. Prime Minister Netanyahu claims that there's no starvation in Gaza. How does that line up with your experience on the ground?
You know, I don't even think it's worth entertaining anymore at this stage. We can all see the images that are coming out of Gaza. There's, you know, I feel at this stage now, after 19 months, the talking points and the denial and the gaslighting, I think we should just put that to one side, and I think we should focus on our energy instead of answering baseless questions like that and disputing these false claims. I think we should just focus on a positive outcome and focus on doing something, rather than, again, debating whether it's happening or not, whether it's a moral quandary or not. Let's get something done.
We understand your friend, Dr. Rose, who's currently in Gaza right now. She's one of many foreign doctors risking their lives to provide aid. Given the dangers, are you at all afraid for her safety, and what are you hearing from the people there now?
You know, when I was in Gaza, I was told many times by many people that I was in danger for filming, that I shouldn't be filming, and I knew the risks. And I remember we were, you know, this was a foreign doctor who was in charge, and I had my phone and I was filming what was going on in the mass casualty event we had, and they said to me, "You're not allowed to film this. It's against the rules." And I said, "Does this look like the rules? These children that are killed, is this the rules?" You know, there's one side that's not following the rules here. Rules of humanitarian and international law. And, you know, if we're not even allowed to bring in medical equipment into Gaza, if we're not even allowed to bring food into Gaza, am I not allowed to bear witness to what happened? And I think the positive thing I think to come out of that is now people are beginning to film, doctors are beginning to do doctor diaries, and they're beginning to show their journey into Gaza, and they're beginning to share the stories of patients, and people are beginning to be humanized. And I think the risk that I took was worth it.
Mm. If there was a message you could say to the doctors currently, right now in Gaza, what would you say to them?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing. I know how difficult the job is there. I know how hopeless you feel. I know how scared they are for their own safety. I know what it's like for their families. Just hang in there. Hang in there and know that the work that you're doing around the world, millions of people are so appreciative of what you're doing. I know because I felt the love when I came home, you know, but we're just doctors. We're just there to heal. It doesn't matter if it's a Palestinian child, an Israeli child. It doesn't matter who it is. We're doctors and we're there to heal, and you know that part of the world needs a lot of healing, and I think people are grateful to see us there.
What was the experience like working with foreign doctors and those native to Gaza? What was the surgery room like? What was the environment like?
You know, it was a very difficult environment to work in. You know, when you get a mass casualty event, especially when we were in the north, there's no triage. So everybody just rushes in, and families come in and they bring the cloths, and inside them are bodies. Sometimes they're alive, sometimes they're dead. The beds get filled up straight away. There's bodies on the floor. People are shouting and screaming. People are angry because you're seeing one patient and their child's on the floor not being seen. Emotions are high. Bombs are going off in the background. You know, it's chaotic. And then you're seeing children with the most horrific injuries. 60% body burns, 80% body burns, severed limbs, arms. Sometimes when you open blankets, heads are missing. Brain matter is everywhere. You know, intestines are hanging out. You're doing procedures on the floor, cutting people's chests open on the floor. You know, it's a chaotic environment, and it's only when you step back after you've dealt with a mass casualty event and you see the blood on the floor and the bodies and the other pile of dead bodies over there. Yeah, it's it haunts you.
From one of our recent conversations, you've mentioned that whenever there would be a mass casualty event or somebody running in, a lot of the doctors wouldn't rush to attend to that patient because that becomes the norm with everyone.
Yeah.
As someone who's perhaps there for your first time, what was that experience like?
So, you know, in Gaza, there's a lot of what's called like compassion fatigue. You know, when you see dozens of dead children a day, a child coming in who's sick, it doesn't trigger the same emotional response as it once did. And doctors are still working really hard there, and they still run to it, but there isn't the same vigor as there was when I was there 9 months ago. It's changed. You know, people have almost given in to the fact that death is just so common in Gaza. Death is not seen as a big deal anymore. They live in between life and death. They live in that middle ground where life and death are the same path to them. And that's why there's compassion fatigue in Gaza, and it breaks my heart to see it for them, because that just shows you the hope that they've lost to live.
Australia's Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, recently issued a strong statement condemning Israel's actions.
Yeah.
These actions is completely unacceptable.
He also insisted Australia follows its own path.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, countries like the UK, France and Canada have begun threatening with concrete actions and sanctions against Netanyahu's government. What's your view on Australia's current stance?
You know, a lot of people have asked me a lot of questions about what I think about the Prime Minister and his response. Look, if he wants to go his own path, then have the courage to go your own path and just do the right thing. And I want to believe that he's equally as moved as millions of people around the world are by those images, and the path that he wants to go on is a path that's going to have positive change. So, you know, we'll see what he does, but I have to be like every Palestinian. You live between hope and despair. Hope for the future, despair for the present that you're currently living in, and I'm hopeful.
Australian former Minister for Industry Ed Husic recently said that the public support for Gaza may have played a key role in his departure from cabinet.
Yep.
Do you believe there's a political cost to speaking out for Palestine in Australia?
You know, I don't know what happens within the internal cabinet. There's a lot of people that have paid the price for speaking out for Gaza, including journalists in Gaza, doctors in Gaza, journalists outside of Gaza. You know, this is a very sensitive topic for a lot of people, and I feel like the tide is changing and people can be more open to talk about it, and people can be more honest with how they feel. So there's a lot of people that have paid a very heavy price for very many years for speaking up for Palestine, but hopefully we're at a point where things are changing.
Dr. Mustafa, you've been one of the biggest supporters for the people of Palestine since returning from Gaza. What gives you that continuous motivation, and was there a point where you felt that you would nearly give up in your support and your determination for this cause?
Do you know, when you know, they haven't given up. The people in Gaza haven't given up, and we can't give up on them. And you know, I always used to ask my mum, and I'd always say to her, Mum, you know, why am I not in Palestine? Why was I born out of Gaza? Why can't I be home? You know, when you grow up as a refugee and you move from country to country, I would ask her, I'd say, why am I not there with everybody else and helping the people on the ground? And you know, she would say to me, Hamada, Allah has a plan for everybody. There's a reason why you're outside of Gaza. There's a reason why Allah wants you here and not there. And I took that in and I internalized that, and I said to myself that whatever I do, I have to help. And that included going to Gaza, and that included after I left Gaza to keep continuing, raising my voice, and hopefully I can make a positive change for the people in Gaza.
You're currently working on to build a pediatric hospital in Gaza. An incredible initiative.
Yeah.
How is that going, and what support do you still need to make that a reality?
Look, the hospital, it's not just about healing the children in Gaza. It's about the journey of getting the hospital. You know, when you watch children every day being killed and burnt alive and their bodies shredded on the floor, you eventually become numb to that and you scroll past. And that dehumanizes yourself. It dehumanizes all of us that are watching this. And, you know, we need to humanize ourselves before we can humanize those children in Gaza. And this hospital is about the journey of getting this hospital. It's about building bridges between communities, fundraising together, bringing Muslims together, Jewish community together, indigenous community, students, mothers, fathers, teachers, different nationalities, all coming together in Australia, united under a cause. And I think if we focus on the humanity of children, whether they be Palestinian children, whether they be Israeli children, they're innocent. And if we can focus on their humanity and focus on that, I think it can build bridges between communities. And I think what it does is it can restore faith in each other, and it can heal the division that we have seen in this country for the last 19 months because of this conflict. So the hospital is not just about healing Gaza, it's about healing here, Australia. It's about healing our society. And, you know, that's what we want to do. That's why it's important. It's important for Australia, and it's important for those kids in Gaza. And it's something that's a tangible change. People can see it. They can see Australian doctors looking after Palestinian children. And I think it will be really powerful to the psychosocial state of the Middle East when they see a Western country healing children, looking after children, and not bombing them, and not starving them to death. I think that changes, and that helps everybody, and it helps us all to heal, because it's not just been a long 2 years in Gaza, it's been a long 25 years of these aggression in the Middle East and all around the Muslim world. And I think it's time we all took a step back and started building bridges again.
If I may ask, what was the impetus behind building this hospital in Gaza, or how did you come up with the idea?
You know, when I got back from Gaza and I landed at Perth Airport, there was like hundreds of people that were there waiting for me, and you know, there was cameras and a microphone, and you know, they put a camera in front of me and they said, you know, say something. And all I could think about was just the amount of children that I'd seen and the amount of children that I left injured and dead. And I just said, we need a hospital. We need a hospital in Gaza. And then they were like, I think someone said, who's going to build the hospital? And I went, we're going to build the hospital. And that was it. And then, you know, I suddenly get messages of people going, are you building a hospital in Gaza? And I was like, oh, I guess I am building a hospital in Gaza. So, you know, since then we just got to work, and, you know, we've met Penny Wong. She told me the barriers that they have to doing something like this, for helping something like this. And I took mental notes, and I said to myself, if these are the barriers, I've got to go and solve them, and then I'll come back with the plan to get this hospital into Gaza, to heal the children, to heal the division in our country, and hopefully something positive and beautiful can come out of this.
If I could touch upon briefly, earlier today you were able to meet the family of Zomi Frankham, one of the world's central kitchen workers in Gaza. Tell us, how did that feel? Because from what I know, one of your aims in opening this hospital is having a kitchen opened in their name.
Yeah.
But how did it feel to meet the family of Zomi Frankham?
Do you know, it was overwhelming, because obviously Zomi is this picture that you see on your screen, and when you go to her home and you see her family and they look like her, and they open up those photo albums and they show you pictures of her, and they show you the letters that people wrote for her and how many people's lives she touched, and all the work that she did all around the world, helping children and feeding children. You know, she was killed for feeding children in Gaza. And not only has she been let down by our country, she's also been let down by the Muslim community, because the Muslim community should have supported her family more. She was there feeding Muslim kids, and she died for that. And I just felt as a Muslim it was an obligation to support her family and to fight for them.
In closing, Dr. Mustafa, people often talk about miracles in Gaza, moments that perhaps defy explanation. Did you see anything in your time in Gaza that made you think and say, this could only be a miracle from God?
You know, there's so many moments in Gaza that are special in their own way. So many things that happen that I would contemplate for a very long time. You know, I remember when there was an explosion only about 100 meters away from the hospital, and debris had flown in the air, and this rock had hit this young girl. She was only 4 years old, in the head, and it cracked her skull in about 3 different places. She was having an internal brain bleed. So when she came to the hospital, she was unconscious. And, you know, we were struggling because we didn't have ventilators. We needed to intubate her, and eventually when we managed to intubate her, and, you know, I was holding her head and neck, because when they have a head injury like that and a rock hits on the head, you worry that they've got a neck fracture. So I was holding her neck the whole time while we were trying to intubate her and move her around, and I was being really protective over her neck. And after we intubated her and we moved her into the intensive care unit, me and the other doctor went to the market outside the hospital to go get some food. And I remember her father came, and he was just so thankful for the care that we were giving to his daughter. And he said to me, I need to invite you for dinner. Let me take you out for dinner. And I said to him, I said, your daughter's in intensive care, go there. And he was like, no, 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 you're our guest. I'd be honored to take you. And, you know, I thanked him, and he gave me a hug. And he went back to the hospital, and I went back to the market. And his daughter died 2 hours later. But I remember just thinking, his priority was to show me appreciation, even though his daughter was in such a state. So, yeah, the way that people in Gaza, just for the smallest thing, are so grateful. That's why I know if I get this hospital into Gaza, it would mean so much to them. So, that's what I'm trying to do.
You've also, in our previous conversation, you've also mentioned of a nurse operating on someone with the recitation of Surah Baqarah. Could you perhaps walk us through that story?
Yeah, so there's a cardiothoracic surgeon in Gaza, and they'd opened up someone's chest, and they were performing surgery. They had a shrapnel injury to the heart, and they were sewing up this damaged heart. And they were trying to restart the heart, and they were doing a cardiac massage. And the surgeon was doing this for up to about an hour, and nothing happened. So he thought, I'll let the student do this. It would be an opportunity for them to learn, but this patient's not going to make it. And the student started doing the cardiac massage and held the heart and was just pressing and pressing. And while he was doing that, he was reading Surah Al-Baqarah. And the cardiothoracic surgeon, because we went with him for coffee, and he told us the story. And he said, as soon as he said, Sadaqallah al-Azim, Ameen, he said the heart started beating again after 2 hours of a cardiac massage. And he said to me that that patient is still alive 1 year later. This was right at the start of the war. And you know, subhanAllah, it just shows you, like, when it's your time, it's your time. And when it's not your time, it's not your time. And everybody in that room had given up on this patient except the student. The student didn't give up. The student was reading Quran. And, you know, that to me was a powerful lesson for all of this, because it's just me and one other guy doing this. Everything that you're seeing, us in the media talking about it, traveling up and down, it's only 2 people organizing everything, doing the planning for the hospital. And organizations keep telling us that you can't do this, you're not experienced, you don't know what you're doing, you need an organization behind you to do this. And just like the student, we're naive enough and we're foolish enough to keep going. And inshallah, we get this done. Just like that student didn't give up on that person, we're not giving up either. No matter the barriers that they put in place, no matter how difficult it seems. If Allah's written something for you, it'll happen. And I believe with all my heart. I grew up outside of the UK, outside of Palestine. I grew up as a refugee. I never got to see most of my relatives for a long part of my life because they were living as refugees all over the world. And there was a lot of pain because of that. But it leads us to a moment, and this is it. This is what I can do for my people. This is what I can do for the country that I live in, is to get this hospital done. And, you know, maybe I am naive, you know, maybe it won't happen. Maybe I can't get it done, you know, maybe it's impossible. But we've managed to do so much in so little time. And, you know, I went from being a hospital that was being bombed in Gaza to a few weeks later talking in the halls of Parliament to a sold-out audience, telling them about my story and Gaza, meeting with ministers and showing them the proposal that we have for this hospital. You know, it's what it is to be a Palestinian. You live between hope and despair. I'm hopeful we can do this. I'm hopeful, and I choose to live in hope.
Dr. Mustafa, it's been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.